What's going on, guys? Let's talk about Blue Shift. In Blue Shift, the main difference in gameplay mechanics is that the player never puts on an HEV suit or powered combat vest, and therefore cannot use HEV charging stations, and in theory, cannot pick up HEV batteries either. The player instead needs to periodically find new security vests and helmets. Although Calhoun doesn't have an HEV suit, the player still has a heads-up display, which is explained during the Blue Shift hazard course as a function of the helmet.
Proximity to radiation activates a Geiger counter and radiation display in your helmet. Many other biological and chemical hazards are also indicated in your heads-up display.
Which doesn't really make sense. Cue the arguments for and against Gordon canonically wearing a helmet. You might assume that Gearbox programmed Blue Shift to disallow the player to pick up and use HEV-related items, and spawn with the HUD by default. But there's a bit of trickery going on here, which is actually a more simplistic workaround. The player actually does start with an HEV suit because you spawn on top of one in the main campaign and the hazard course. As you may have already guessed, the vest and helmet are essentially new varieties of the battery, giving you instead 60 and 40 points of armor respectively. We can see this when we load up the chapter in Security from the console. Since we don't spawn on top of the suit and pick it up, we won't have a HUD, and will therefore have no ability to pick up armor, in this case the vest and helmet. Using cheats, we can spawn a suit, and we can see that the HUD appears, and we can now pick up the armor. Using a modified version of Blue Shift called Blue Shift Unlocked, we can load up original Half-Life maps. And we see that the HEV chargers actually still work. As it turns out, for the few rare times you do see HEV charging stations in the Blue Shift campaign, they are actually just buttons that play the denied sound effect. Pretty crafty. On a side note, I did notice that the HEV suit in Sector C gives the player an initial 40 points of armor, whereas when you start the game in Blue Shift, you have 0 armor. In my video, The Mediocre Mystery of the Missing Hazard Suits, we explored how the suit in Sector C is actually an entity called World Items, as opposed to an item suit. When I place both entities into a map, we can see that the regular suit gives 0 armor, and the World Item suit gives an additional 40 points. So while I was editing this video, I realized that the World Item suit also spawned an item helmet, so that would explain it. Perhaps Gearbox was exploring the possibility of having the vest act as an initial suit pickup at some point. Not sure. Let's talk about Otis. You might recall seeing Otis a few times in Blue Shift, but he too is an illusion. There is no true Otis NPC, like we see in Opposing Force, where he can follow us if we ask him, attack enemies, and where he carries a Desert Eagle. Here's another test map I made, where I placed a monster Otis from Opposing Force and a monster Rosenberg from Blue Shift into the same map. When I load the map in Opposing Force, the Otis spawns, and the Rosenberg does not. When I load the map into Blue Shift, the opposite is true. The few times that you do see Otis, you cannot truly interact with him, other than shooting the one in the target range. This is because these are just monster generics, which are used to spawn any model into the game without adding any additional code. This is why you never get an Otis to follow you in Blue Shift. In fact, you hardly ever get any NPCs to follow you, except for Rosenberg, of course. But there are other scientists you find in the freight yard, but you just end up leaving them where you find them? I never really thought about it until I played the Blue Shift remaster for Black Mesa, where you collect all the NPCs and escort them safely to the prototype labs with Rosenberg. This had me wondering, can you save the other 2 scientists and bring them with you to the labs? Well, yes and no. If you try to lead them forward with you, you'll reach a section where you must jump through a hole in the gate, so you won't be able to go any further with the scientists. And after you rescue Rosenberg and travel back to the first stairwell, the door to the office is locked. So you'd have to escort them backwards, leave them on the other side of the locked door, and come get them after you find Rosenberg. But for some reason they don't really want to pass through this hallway. I spent a long time trying to cajole them into passing through the door at the right angle.
With my brains and your this is as far as I go. I'll be right behind you. This is as far as I go, yes.
And at this time, I realized I was hearing some original scientist voice lines that I would have never otherwise noticed.
I suppose a security guard should know what he's doing. Let's go. Well, if you think I can help, yes, You seem like someone I can trust. You're going to have to leave me here. I'll be right behind you.
After some frustration, I decided to open the map file in a viewer program, and I learned that there is a funk monster clip in the doorway, which is basically an invisible wall for NPCs. However, you have to actually designate whether or not an NPC is subject to the monster clip. So the Einstein scientist cannot pass through, but the glasses scientist can. So when you get him through, you can leave him near the prototype labs elevator, and eventually bring him down with you in Rosenberg. The last issue is, the teleportation sequence is actually 2 separate maps. So when you first reach the area, you're in BA Teleport 1. And when you come back from Zen, you're in BA Teleport 2. And there's no way to pass him between the 2 maps, so effectively he's doomed.
The field, it's open! Calhoun,
Let's go.
enter the teleporter!
I would like to mention that when you come back into the lab for the 3rd time, after Power Struggle, the map is still BA Teleport 2. Which is kind of funny, because when you come back from Zen, you're technically still in the chapter Focal Point, but if you save the game, it says A Leap of Faith. But that chapter doesn't start until you come back up after charging the power cell. This wouldn't be the first time a save file had a mismatched chapter name. In Half-Life, when you save the map at the big portal before Nihilith, it says Zen, but technically we're in Interloper. Alright, well that's about it. Before I go, since I showed you some lesser known scientist voice lines, I'll leave you with some Barney lines as well. Thanks for watching.
Hey, how are ya? Hey, Calhoun. Looks like we're in for a long day today. How's it going, Calhoun? How's it going?
Hey, catch me later, I'll buy you a beer.